Brian Freeman has done it all in the cause of raising awareness and money for veterans of the war in Afghanistan, scaling the highest peaks, crossing entire continents and kayaking alone across vast stretches of ocean. His charity, called Walking Wounded, was meant to support the families of dead soldiers and to offer support services such as counselling to veterans in need. But last year, without explanation, Walking Wounded was stripped of its charity status by the Federal Charities Regulator. Tonight, 7:30 can reveal that Walking Wounded stands accused of failing to deliver on its mission. Mr Freeman's now moved on to a new venture, leaving behind the devastated families who threw themselves into raising money for his now defunct charity. This report from Mark Willesee and producer Alexandra Blucher.
On the 21st of June 2010, Scott Palmer and his fellow commandos were killed when their Black Hawk helicopter crashed in Afghanistan's Kandahar province, deep inside Taliban territory.
It was like early hours of the morning, it was dark, things happen, and unfortunately the chopper was flying at low level and crashed.
It's any parent's call that you don't want to ever get, and it's just a nightmare. It goes blank.
Devastated by the death of their son, Pam and Ray Palmer wanted to channel their grief into something positive, to help soldiers who did make it home, but who were suffering from the mental ravages of war. That's when they met Brian Freeman.
The first impressions of Brian, his heart was in the right position and he wanted to help the boys. They're all hurting and they needed help.
Summer push, have a little think. It's unbelievably dangerous.
Brian Freeman promotes himself as a former Special Forces officer and describes himself as arguably Australia's greatest ever adventurer. As well as scaling Mount Everest, Brian Freeman lists world records for the fastest traverse of the Kokoda Trail, as well as 2 crossings of the Simpson Desert on foot.
My name is Brian Freeman.
In 2014, he formed Walking Wounded, a charity with the aim of helping Afghanistan veterans suffering from mental and physical issues. Up in Darwin, Pam and Ray Palmer gave up their jobs and threw themselves into raising money for the charity, personally collecting more than $70,000 for Walking Wounded.
It was going to assist in getting specialists involved, like people that could come in, physios and so forth like that, to help the boys with their injuries.
According to Walking Wounded's website, the charity's primary objective was to intervene and prevent the concerning incidences of suicide in the young veteran community. There was to be help with rehabilitation and employment, counselling support and mentoring programs.
We see the physical wounds, we see the amputations and the disfigurations, but it's the mental scars of war that are far more debilitating.
This is the cowling from the Black Hawk helicopter that was used to bring out our dead and wounded after the Black Hawk crash in Kandahar in 2010.
While Brian Freeman talked about helping Afghanistan veterans, some in the defence community were uneasy about him right from the start.
He seemed to be highly skilled at promoting himself and indeed the cause.
Australian War Memorial Director and former Defence Minister Brendan Nelson attended a dinner for the families of the Afghanistan fallen in Canberra in 2015. A dinner addressed by Mr Freeman.
As the evening went on, it became clear to me it wasn't about them, it was about Mr Freeman. And I said to my wife, just before 10 o'clock, I said, I think we'll go. And I had to leave, and I did.
By that time, Brendan Nelson had already agreed to provide Walking Wounded with a roll of honour containing the names of Australian soldiers who died in Afghanistan, all to help with fundraising efforts.
We went to a lot of trouble in hand-making a canister for the roll of honour to go into, and the last I saw of Mr Freeman was the presentation of the canister and the roll of honour.
The canister containing the roll of honour would be taken on treks to places like Kokoda as part of Brian Freeman's efforts to raise money and help veterans. But he would also travel much further afield, taking the roll of honour to Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa and to Mount Everest, which raised questions among some families of the fallen about the charity's focus and spending.
The boys didn't fight in Everest. They didn't fight in Kilimanjaro. Who cares? But what has the honour roll got to do with Everest?
85 days, 65 kilometres a day, 7 pairs of shoes. Pain he hopes won't be without gain.
On one of his treks with the Roll of Honour, Brian Freeman set off in 2015 on a walk from Cape York to the southern tip of Tasmania, all to raise a stated $2 million for Walking Wounded's program to help veterans. An Afghanistan veteran diagnosed with PTSD, Rachel Ingram joined Walking Wounded after being approached by Brian Freeman and believing in his cause.
Hindsight's a marvellous thing, but when I first met Brian Freeman, I believed that he, if the families of fallen soldiers were supporting him, he must have been a legit kind of person.
From the beginning of the trek in North Queensland, the former soldier was overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers.
He'd be walking along the road and lots of grey nomads would stop. A lot were Vietnam veterans, and he'd tell them about the cause, and he's raising money to raise awareness of veteran suicide, and people gave. I saw people, a car came past one day with a group of local Indigenous people, they gave the money out of their ashtray.
Despite seeing all this money coming in, Rachel Ingram says she saw no evidence of veterans getting help with counselling and rehabilitation.
Did you ever confront Brian Freeman about where all this money was going?
Later, yes, I did. Where is it? Where are the veterans? Who's helping them?
Walking Wounded didn't just attract loose change from ashtrays. The charity received more than $1 million in backing from the corporate sector. One big donor was Sunny Queen Eggs, which pitched in with more than $300,000 in cash and in-kind support.
There's a truth about our returned soldiers, an alarming truth that the Australian public needs to know about.
Another supporter of Walking Wounded was the advertising giant O-Media, which gave the charity $1 million in free publicity, with hundreds of billboards promoting the charity's message of suicide prevention.
If this campaign can save just one soldier, it's a worthy mission.
Then, in late 2016, major sponsor Sunny Queen Eggs pulled its support for Walking Wounded. In a statement, the company told 730,
Sunny Queen was assured by Brian Freeman that all donated funds were being used by Walking Wounded to directly help soldiers in need. Sunny Queen ceased its support after becoming increasingly concerned about the lack of details supplied by Mr. Freeman about exactly how the funds were being utilised and the lack of specific details about soldiers who had benefited from Walking Wounded's help.
Then, just weeks later, the federal charities regulator stripped Walking Wounded of its charity status. The Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission refused to tell 730 why it did this, saying it's bound by strict secrecy provisions.
We were engaged to do the day-to-day accounting, the bookkeeping.
Now, Walking Wounded's former bookkeeper is speaking out about her concerns about how the charity's money was managed. Anita Jenkins didn't just do Walking Wounded's books, she also paid to go on a Kokoda Trek with the charity. But after going through Walking Wounded's accounts in 2015, she discovered that large amounts were going on personal items from places like bottle shops and supermarkets. Then there was the unusual way Mr. Freeman was paid.
He wasn't being paid a regular wage, he was being paid a direct debit that he would take out of the account whenever he thought he needed the money.
Is that standard practice?
No.
That made you uncomfortable?
Absolutely.
Less than a year after she began doing Walking Wounded's books, Anita Jenkins withdrew her firm's services. And she says only Brian Freeman can now answer questions about the charity's finances.
He was the driving force. He was the main person that we dealt with. He was the one that had the signatory on the accounts. He was the one that instructed how things were directed for payment.
What is known is that tens of thousands were spent on treks to places like Kokoda, which did help some veterans struggling with psychological scars.
How many of them are NGOs?
What's not clear at all is how much money was directed towards Walking Wounded's core purpose of counselling services, rehabilitation and mentoring. 7:30 can reveal tonight that Brian Freeman was repeatedly offered free help to help set up a counselling service for his charity.
We were prepared to use all our resources to set up a counselling cell to be made available for free to veterans and particularly veterans' families.
So you're offering counselling to set that up for free?
Yep, we're offering to do all the work.
A veteran himself, Philip Armstrong, wanted to donate counselling training for up to 3 Walking Wounded staff. But he says months went by and Brian Freeman never took up the offer of help.
We had everything ready. But as I said, when we came to the point of, OK, where are we putting all this, then there was nothing. It was just Brian made a lot of promises in the last meeting we had with him, and we never saw him again.
Mr Freeman, it's Mark Willesee from the ABC 7:30 program.
7:30 contacted Brian Freeman on a ropey phone line in Nepal, where he's leading an Everest expedition for a group of business clients.
I don't want to be part of a witch hunt or he said, she said, don't said. You know, we've done a really good job saving people's lives. A really, really, really good job.
Why did the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission shut down Walking Wounded's charity status? Can you tell us that?
I'm really happy to sit down, but I don't want cameras.
Why don't I send you a detailed list of questions, and that way that you can...
I'm not going to do that. I'm not doing anything in writing. I'm not doing anything in cameras.
So nothing in writing and nothing with cameras?
I'm just going to discontinue the phone call. Sorry, mate.
Brian Freeman later responded to some of the written questions provided by 7:30, unequivocally denying that he didn't help any veterans, saying he helped many.
Speculation has been swirling for months within defence circles about just why Walking Wounded has been stripped of its charity status. But that hasn't stopped Brian Freeman, who's launched a new commercial venture, one that promotes itself using the apparent endorsement of a former head of the Australian Defence Force, a man who lives not far from here at Yarralumla.
According to this promotional material for that new venture called Freeman High Performance, the Governor-General, Sir Peter Cosgrove, regards Brian Freeman as the archetypal doer, cheerful, wise, honest and determined, with a great social conscience. But the Governor-General's office told 7:30 he did not approve of any testimonial or endorsement for Mr Freeman. It says it has repeatedly asked him to remove statements attributed to the Governor-General.
Appropriating the name of the Governor-General, particularly in our contemporary history, our most distinguished military leader, for Mr Freeman's own ambitions in the process of, it would seem, exploiting these families who've given the thing they loved most in Afghanistan, that's pretty low.
On the angle.
Brian Freeman insisted to 7:30 that Sir Peter Cosgrove did write the testimonial prior to taking office as Governor-General. For some of those who gave their time, expertise and money to Walking Wounded, the greatest disappointment is for the families of the fallen, who supported the charity until its collapse.
Anyone that can exploit, if not prey upon, these families who have given their sons, their fathers, their husbands, their brothers to our nation in our uniform, under our flag, is worthy of the utmost criticism and scrutiny.
Walking Wounded may have folded, but Brian Freeman still has in his possession the Roll of Honour, containing the names of the Afghanistan fallen that was given to him by the Australian War Memorial. And he now uses the Roll of Honour to promote his new commercial venture.
He's using it for something that's absolutely disgraceful. You don't use the deaths of 41 boys, and especially the suffering the family gone through, to gain, how you say, greatness of saying this is who I am, I'm the greatest adventurer. But he's kept using it for his own well-being. And that's not right.